Welcome back, Chappelle. Oh, wait, no. Let's try that again. Welcome back, Honors. All right, so probably just going to leave that in there just to give it some levity and whatnot. Now, oh, God. All right, so anyway, we left off in class getting into the radical phase of the revolution, right? So we now have left the moderate phase, and some of you are like, how is that even considered moderate? All right, so, well, we were talking mostly about, like, a lot of different odds and ends, right? We were talking about the crazy, ridiculous, constant action-reaction, right? And if I were you, I would start studying the moderate phase of the revolution. Just the big events coming from storming of the Bastille all the way up to, what did we get to? The execution of Louis, right? Because the execution of Louis kind of truly begins the radical phase of the revolution, because now that this power vacuum has popped up, now it's going to be filled by this thing called the Committee of Public Safety, right? So the Committee of Public Safety took over following the death of Louis XVI and is going to act as the de facto wartime monarchy, right? Now, because don't forget, we're at war, right? Remember, French intensity just continues to grow, right? They're at war with Austria. They're making major gains. Napoleon's getting all of his experience. Like, it's getting super intense, right? Now, anyway, continuing forward, though, they are going to do a lot of things coming out the gate. They're going to, first of all, following the first committee, they're going to purge and execute all the Girondin Club members that are remaining, right? Because the Committee of Public Safety was started by the leftover Jacobins, right? Now, just so you know, just because I hate not saying this stuff because I think it's neat. So there were three major clubs that were organized inside of the Legislative Assembly by this point, right? Inside the National Assembly, which was trying to rule over this entire country by this point and pretty much Xing out Louis' power. Well, Louis' power is definitely X'd out now. All right, so he's dead. Now, there were three major groups at the start, right? So there were like these Cordeliers, the Jacobins, the Girondins, right? And then there became another group in the middle, and they were called the Plain, right? Like the Plain as in being like this middle group, kind of moderate, kind of could be swayed by one way or the other. The Girondins were constantly trying to fight for the Plain's votes, and so were the Jacobins and the Cordeliers, right? Now, the Jacobins and the Cordeliers, though, are going to join forces and unite and make a new club called the Montagnards, right? And Montagnard means the mountain, okay? So they call themselves the Montagnards because they sat on benches that were higher up than everybody else's, okay? So if you're ever looking into this stuff and you see that Maximilien Robespierre was a Montagnard, he started as a Jacobin, right? So and then became a Montagnard, all right? Just so you know, just so you know, just so you know. Now, anyway, so this whole committee process was started by your boys Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton, right? Here is Robespierre, of course, who's going to rise up as probably one of the most prominent figures in all of all of French history, all of European history, period. Maximilien Robespierre is considered one of these, like, really intense figures. Whereas Georges Danton is not, right? Georges Danton is, like, you ask people if they know who he is, a lot of people are like, he sounds French. So, reason being because one of them is going to come out super powerful and the other one is not, right? So, the Committee of Public Safety is going to come in and do a lot of crazy stuff, right? A lot of crazy stuff. They're going to try and distract people with a lot of executions, and they're going to try and change a lot of major things about French society, right? So one of the big things is they're going to rename all the months and the days of the week, right? So they're going to rename all the months to brand new month. Like, hold on, let me look at it. Like, my favorite one is Thermidor, right? Thermidor is what they changed the month of July to, and Thermidor means like the hot month, right? Literally, and like translated into English, it means the hot month. Months under the Committee of Public Safety. Or I probably should have just done Committee of Public Safety calendar. Now, anyway, here we go. Wait, okay, how about we'll do that? Committee, oh wait, and I'll go ahead and get you the next one. All the months also included only 30 days of the months, right? And some of y'all are immediately like, well, how the heck is this gonna work out? This sounds super complicated because there's like 7 days every week, and then, you know, there's a certain number of hours, and how can all the months have 30 days if there's 7 days of the week? That's gonna mess everything up, right? Well, they wanted some evenness, so they tried to cancel Christianity by dropping Sundays and closing church altogether. So every single day of the week, every week went down to 6 days, right? So they had canceled Sundays altogether. calendar. Here we go. Calendar. If you give me like a French Revolution calendar, I'm going to be... Oh, here we go. So yeah, you had different months now, like Vendémiaire or Brumaire or Frimaire or Nivose and blah, blah. And like, it was crazy. Like, the revolutionary calendar looks absolutely wild. I got to like print this thing out for y'all so you can see it. But my favorite one, like I said, is the month of Thermidor, which is actually half of July and half of August, right? But they cancel Sundays, they close every church. The Committee of Public Safety even put an entire convent of nuns under the guillotine and executed all of them because they refused to renounce their faith, right? They canceled Christianity, or tried to anyway. They wanted to turn Notre Dame into a shopping mall, like a big flea market, and they like created a new religion inside of France called like the Cult of the Supreme Being, right? Like, it's absolutely wild what they're doing, because this is a big component of this thing called the Reign of Terror, right? This was considered a direct political philosophy by the Committee of Public Safety. After the death of Louis in 1793, the Reign of Terror is slowly adopted. I know up here it says the Reign of Terror began. That's just so you can kind of understand a little bit. But after the death of Louis in 1793, the Reign of Terror is really going to start getting kicked off. And one of the first people executed by the Reign of Terror is known as Marie Antoinette. That's right. Poor Marie Antoinette was executed. And she started a prominent parade of super, super important people and then not so important people to their deaths, right? This guillotine, this new contraption, is going to get put to work, right? It's going to start just being like the Walmart express lane of execution tools, right? They're just going to be like, oh, you're done, oh, you're done, oh, you're done, and they're just going to be executing tons of people. Now, despite common belief, Marie Antoinette never said, let them eat cake, right? She never was like... That was something that was propagated following her death to try and make her look stupid. She actually was put to death for a wild amount of other reasons that I don't want to say on the internet right now, but we'll talk about tomorrow in class. She'd be like, Mr. Terry, why was she put to death? What happened with Marie Antoinette? What went down? So, and we'll talk about it. Don't worry, all right? So public executions became like an educational format because this aspect of terror was considered to be this political philosophy, right? They believed that if they were ruling France through fear, that would prevent any of these counter-revolutionaries from popping up, right? So every time you went in front of the Revolutionary Tribunal to be put on trial, they outlawed lawyers, so you weren't allowed to have representation, and there were one of two verdicts that came out: innocent or death, right? Like, period. If you were guilty, you were put to death by the Revolutionary Tribunal in Paris, right, in particular. In Paris, over 2,300 people were put to death from the Revolutionary Tribunal. And the Reign of Terror only lasted for about a year and a half, right? Like, so the numbers, speaking of that, is wildly out of sorts. So let's say hypothetically that the Reign of Terror lasted 2 years, right? So let's double check the dates on it really quick. So the Reign of Terror, years, lasted from, I think it's like September 5th, 1793. Yep, September 5th, 1793 to July 28th, 1794. So technically, it didn't even last necessarily a full year, right? So it didn't last a full year. Unless you consider the death of Louis being the very, very kicked off start, you could say theoretically it lasted about a year and a half. So let's say about a year and a half, right? So let's say 365 days of the year, right, times 0.5 is going to be 182. So 182.5 plus 365. You're talking about 547 days of the Reign of Terror, right? 547 and a half days. We'll just say 547. And about the ridiculous part about it is over 300,000 people were arrested. 10,000 of them probably died in prison or beaten to death in the streets, and 17,000 were officially executed, right? So theoretically speaking, with 547 days of like the Reign of Terror and 17,000 official executions, let's divide that by 547. That means 31 people were put to death every day, every single day. 31 people were executed via guillotine every single day in France, right? Like, so like that is wild. Public executions were like going to the movies. People loved it, and especially the sans-culottes loved it, right? Because they liked to see this happening. Because what were the bulk of people being executed? A lot of them were aristocrats, right? A ton of them were aristocrats. A lot of them were prominent figures from before the Revolution, several marquises. And I know some of y'all are like, what about the Marquis de Lafayette? Did he die? He actually didn't. he escaped out of France when this started. So the Marquis de Lafayette, by this point of the revolution, had been banished out of France, right? Because that's another big thing that the Committee of Public Safety loved to do, was banish tons and tons of these former nobles and be like, you're not allowed, like, banish. You are banished from France. And they would just be kicked out of France altogether, right? And then this stuff starts happening. The members of the committee begin to fall, right? So this right here, that's Jean-Paul Marat. Right? Remember when we talked about Marat? Marat was the journalist, right, that started like doing all these expose articles. He wrote the article about Louis stomping on the cockade. He wrote articles about the Girondins being negative and like too soft. He wrote articles about everything, and he was a Jacobin / Montagnard journalist, right? So big prominent figure, and he loved the violence. He wanted to keep it going, so he wrote all these crazy articles, right? One day, a Girondin sympathizer, a woman named, I think her name was Madeline or Margaret, or Charlotte, or Cordray is her last name, Cordray, knocked on his door, gained access to his room, and stabbed him to death in his medical bathtub that he had to sit in for several hours a day because of his skin disease that he acquired from living in the sewers, right? But he's going to be stabbed to death. So his image of his death is this image that there are rational-minded people in France still, right? That this woman who snuck into his room and pulled a 7-inch blade out of her dress and stabbed him right here under the collarbone, hit an artery, and he bled out into his bath and sat there and slumped down and died, is an image that there are people that are against the reign of terror, right? And she actually is going to be put on trial as well, and then also executed by the guillotine for the death of Marat, right? And then at her trial, they asked her, did you do this? And she said, yes, I did. I murdered one man to save 100,000. That's insane, right? So Marat ends up dead. Oh, and then Danton ends up dead because Robespierre executes him, right? So Robespierre turns on his partner, Georges Danton, and has Georges Danton executed by guillotine in front of the entire country because he believed that he was a counter-revolutionary. You have to understand something about Robespierre. He's very paranoid, right? So Robespierre had designed the terror specifically to fight these enemies of the revolution, right? To prevent counter-revolutionaries from gaining any ground. And you could be brought to execution for anything, for slightly impinging on Robespierre's authority, right? For trying to even insinuate that you missed the king, right? For most of these people who were rounded up were not aristocrats. A lot of them were just straight up ordinary people. Danton ends up being executed, though, because Robespierre believes that he's trying to conspire to take his power, right? So Danton ends up executed. Marat is executed, right? And some of you are like, oh my God, they took Louis down and just replaced him with Robespierre, who's way worse, right? And you're not wrong. But remember, there are good people out there still, right? And I have to show you this thing really quick because look what happens to... we'll insert this new slide real quick because look what happens to Robespierre eventually. People are going to grow tired of this revolution, right? They're going to grow tired of all this violence. They're going to grow tired of all this extremism, right? They're going to grow tired of this economy that's not working because the Committee of Public Safety even set prices on bread, right? They were like, bread cannot be sold over this price period ever. And so that's ignoring market fluctuations completely, right? So Robespierre is going to be arrested by a new group called the Thermidorians, right? The Thermidorians are going to arrest him and capture him and put him on trial and have Robespierre executed because not everybody wants to continue to see thousands of people put to death, right? Like, so, like, they're tired of it. They're sick of all this bloodshed. They want to get to a point where things can be fixed. And when Robespierre went to the scaffold onto the guillotine to be executed, he had a hole in his face. He actually had gotten shot in the face and it went through his cheek and knocked out a lot of his bottom teeth. And he claims he was trying to shoot himself when he knew he was about to be arrested, and that he screwed it up and got hit in the arm, and it went bow, and it went like right out the side of his face. A guy, though, instead claims that it's one of the arresting gendarmes, is what they're called, one of the police officers. He claims he shot Robespierre in the face, right? So we don't really know who shot Robespierre, but we do know that when his head was cut off, he had a hole in his face, right? So Robespierre is even going to be executed as well. And then a new phase of the revolution begins. This is the Directory phase, right? Some of you are like, man, the radical phase was like that. Well, yeah, it only lasted like a year and a half, right? So, like, The people had grown tired of this instability and this bloodshed of the revolution, and were ready for something a lot more moderate, right? So we're going back to another moderate phase, right? And the Directory is going to be that thing, because by 1795, the Republic of France is pretty much completely gone, right? And 5 men with business interests, basically 5 old aristocrats, were brought in to have executive power, right? They were brought in almost like a set of prime ministers. 5, because it keeps things from being deadlocked in an uneven vote, right? So that way you have at least one person who can sway votes to get things started. The Directory ends up spending over a year trying to calm everything down, just trying to get to a stable point again. And things are still going crazy out of control. France is still at war in the First Coalition. They are still wildly at war. They are still having bread problems and stuff like that. So this revolution still isn't over yet, just because these 5 people are in charge. And this new 5-man government was called the Directory. But who is going to be the man that shows up to destroy the Directory and make himself the Emperor of France? That's right, Napoleon. And we will begin talking about him tomorrow. Can't wait to see you guys. I'll see y'all then. Have a great evening.